There we are. Welcome, welcome. Welcome, everybody. I'm so happy that you're here for Liberation Through Nature for our people of color, African American students, staff, and faculty. This is our first event for our wilderness series that we're hosting here at College of Marin, really focusing on nature and bringing this to our students of color, staff of color, and faculty of color. This event is part of our Umoja Equity Institute, and we're also in conjunction with our psychological services at College of Marin, which really looking at mental health equity in students of color here at College of Marin. So this is our first series. We're so happy to have you here. And just want to know in terms of how to offer questions and just the format of the session, go ahead and post your questions in the chat. We ask that you use all of the questions through chat, not unmute yourself and things like that. And we'll work through those questions and just kind of this is an informal, natural conversation, see how kind of the flow and what questions come up as we go through the session. So I want to welcome everyone again and introduce Phoenix Smith here, who is presenting Liberation Through Nature. Phoenix is a practitioner of mental health and mindfulness-based therapy and using nature to heal. You work in the community in terms of a variety of different healthcare facilities, as well as has a master's in social work. So really part of the community and talking about this really important issue. I'm Patricia France. If you don't know me, some of you do, some of my students are here, but I teach in the English Skills Department at College of Marin. I'm also part of the Umoja program, which is a learning community for our African American students and African diaspora students of color, really trying to promote success in hosting these kind of events to give them a sense of freedom and excellence and striving for the best in their lives. So I'm going to turn it over to Phoenix and follow your leads. All right, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here. I want to thank Patricia and Colleen and all the people at Marin that gathered together to make it possible for me to come and speak to you today. I also want to, before I start, just thank you and all the people in your community that are doing what they need to do so that you can sit in front of this computer and Zoom for the next hour or so, because I know we're all at home and we all have different kinds of home lives. You may have children, parents, etc. So I want to thank your community for giving you some time to just sit here and listen and be with me today. So thank you very much. So I want to start with a little short video. We are living in very intense times, as you know. I also work full-time in public health in Alameda County. So I've been involved in the vaccine clinics and I wear many different hats. I know some people may have lost family to COVID or to other illnesses. And, I have family right now that's in Texas that's dealing with no power and no water. Climate emergency is real. So I just want to take a minute for us to just kind of breathe together and just be present with each other here, because it's a stressful world right now, and just want to give us a time to land here and come together. So just 1 second. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. So let me just share my screen and share a little video for you right quick. Can you hear it? Nope. 1 second. Let me try it again. I took my headphones off.
Hi.
Can you hear it now?
Tired, irritable, stressed out? Well, you might consider nature.
From the people that brought you Getting Outside comes prescription strength Nature, a non-harmful medication shown to relieve the crippling symptoms of modern life.
Nature's recommended for humans of all ages, and it's great for pets too.
Nature can reduce cynicism, meaninglessness, anal retentiveness, and murderous rage. In clinical studies, Nature is proven to decrease work-induced catatonia.
Caution, nature may cause you to slow down, quit your job, or seriously consider what the you're doing with your life.
If you are overly cynical, jaded, or emotionally numb, you may need to increase your dose of Nature. Do you have trouble being even mildly uncomfortable? Nature may not be right for you. Side effects may include spontaneous euphoria, taking yourself less seriously, and being in a good mood for no apparent reason.
So ask your doctor if nature is right for you.
Great.
So, I just wanted to lighten it up a little bit, right? Because we all need some nature. We all need nature in various ways. So I thought I would share that. They have a series of really good videos that are like infomercials around connecting with nature. So I'm going to go into my PowerPoint. All right. Let me see here. So I want to start off by just doing acknowledgement of where we are, where Marin Community College sits. And I want to give thanks and praise to the Indigenous people of this land, to the Coast Miwok people, and that's a picture of Mount Tam, my favorite mountain in the world. I'm in Marin a lot because I come and hike that mountain a lot. And so I just want to give acknowledgement to the Indigenous people of this community in this place. And I live in Oakland on Ohlone land. And I just want to say thank you. I've received lots of support and generosity from my relationship with Indigenous people here that have allowed me to be a visitor here and allowed me to do this work. I also want to share that there's a link there, and we can put it in the chat. There's a fundraiser going on now for Miwok people in Marin County to raise money for the Indigenous people, the Miwok people in Marin County in that area, to be able to build a community center, et cetera. So I think it's important that we not only acknowledge the Indigenous people on whose lands we live and build our communities and family, but that we actively support their efforts in continuing to expand their culture and share with us here. So I want to give thanks before I start. So this is a picture of who I come from, my ancestors. And so I like these two pictures for two reasons. One, the picture on the left shows the labor that my ancestors put in so that I could be here today, so that we could have the United States, so that we could have the national park system, et cetera. My paternal grandfather, who is in the back with the hat kind of cocked to the side on the left and the overalls, he was actively involved during the Depression in helping to build national parks. So I don't know if you've been following the news, but President Biden is wanting to create sort of like a green core service where young people and other people could get jobs, right? Doing work to help with the green economy in this country. And this is based on a model from the 30s during the Depression. I believe it was called WPA was the program. Yeah. And so many people, many men of all races around the country were able to get work. And I didn't find this out that my paternal grandfather helped to build the national parks until like 5 years ago when my stepmother pulled the picture out and told me. So I wanted to share this story because sometimes what we may feel or seem as Black people, as Indigenous people, as other people of color, is that we don't belong, that we don't have a story that connects us to the place or to this whole system of national parks and everything. And I'm like, well, in my ancestry, my grandfather helped build, my paternal grandfather helped build the national parks. So I want to give thanks and praise to my ancestors. And then on the right are my grandparents and some of my aunts and uncles. To me, this picture shows Black joy, that in the midst of the struggle and the pain and all the things that many of our ancestors, especially those of us who come from communities that have been historically oppressed, where our land was taken from us, where we were taken from our homelands and brought here to work and build the country, where we may have come here and been in internment camps, Japanese Americans who had extensive communities of farms in California and whose lands were taken, that we do belong here, right? Like our ancestors' labor, their wisdom, their intelligence helped build this country. And also that in the midst of very difficult, hard times like we are going through now, that my ancestors were able to tap into Black joy. And they did that through community and being connected with each other. So I think it's important to show that it's not just about trauma, but that there are also gifts that we have from our ancestors, right? So these two pictures for me kind of helped me to remember that, like, yes, there was sacrifice and labor and physical labor and trauma that happened to my family and my ancestors. And at the same time, they were able to access joy as well and find a sense of belonging as well. So my name's Phoenix. I go by the pronoun she or they. I live on Ohlone land in East Oakland, but I grew up in San Antonio, Texas, in South Texas, like a few hours from the border from Mexico. So the indigenous community where I grew up are the Tapilam Coatiquin Nation. So I want to give thanks and praise to them. I'm a first generation college graduate. I'm the youngest of 5 in my family, but I'm the first one to finish college. My older siblings, they tried, but they didn't finish. But actually, that's not correct. One of my older siblings, at the age of 58 years old, just got her associate's degree at a community college in Houston, Texas. So she did not give up. And so she just literally 2 weeks ago, got her associate's degree. So it was very hard for me to go to college. It was very, very, very difficult. It wasn't easy. So I want to just honor and recognize those of you that are students here that, I'm here to support you and that don't give up no matter what your age. I went later and got a master's degree at Howard University School of Social Work, but it wasn't like I went to college, got a bachelor's degree, and then got a master's degree. I had to work throughout my whole time of being in college. I've always worked. So I was working for a while after I got my bachelor's degree because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer because I worked at a law firm to help support me. But when you're that close up to lawyers, I realized I don't want to do that. So, but I took time to kind of figure out what it is that I wanted to do. And it turned out that social work was the right field for me. And when I was in my early 30s, I went back to school and got my master's degree at Howard University while I worked at the same time. That's when I started working in public health. I worked a lot at jails in Washington, D.C. with different communities and different populations, and started working in public health. And today I work for the Alameda County Public Health Department in Oakland. My full-time job, I'm the director of an Office of HIV Care. I'm responsible for funding all of our clinics and our community-based organizations that provide services to people living with HIV. I work a lot with doctors and nurses and social workers. And so that's what I'm doing for my regular full-time job. In 2011, I got a graduate certificate in ecotherapy from JFK University at the time. And it was the first ecotherapy certificate ever in the world. And from there, I combined my knowledge and skills in public health with ecotherapy to create a practice, of which I'll talk about some more later. But another pivotal event in my life, so you can get to know who I am, is that in 2008, I was initiated in an African traditional religion, the religion of the Orisha, Some of you may have heard of them. And in Cuba, it's called Lucumi. And so that particular moment in my life changed my life significantly and actually deepened my connection to nature. So all of these things inform my path and who I am. As I said, you know, I'm a first generation college graduate. I had to work all the time to pay for school. I didn't go back to get my master's degree until later in life. So there's many different paths you can take. There's not one way. So I just wanted to share that. So I want to share this quote that resonates with me a lot. Malidoma Somé is a psychologist, and he is from West Africa, from the country called Burkina Faso. And he writes a lot about connecting with nature for healing. And he says that it's more important to heal our relationship with nature by doing our own emotional work than by seeking extraordinary experiences that appear supernaturally powerful. And this is what has been the path for me, and the case for me, is that connecting in with nature for me has been much more than I could ever imagine. It hasn't just been, oh, it feels good for me physically, my physical body, but I've also been able to experience a lot of emotional healing and spiritual healing and deeper connection to my ancestors through this work as well. Some of the things that have happened to all of us, no matter what our race or ethnicity, is what I call a great separation that is the byproduct of colonization all around the world. And that great separation starts with violence to the earth, right? Through the destructive practices that have happened, that have harmed the earth for many, many, many years. And then it goes to violence to animals and violence to humans. All of this is connected. And it has created a separation where some of us still feel disconnected from nature. But it's all because of how colonization was enacted here on Turtle Island, but all over the world, that we see these places where there's great harm that's done to the earth is directly connected to the violence that is done to us as humans. This is a core philosophical, theoretical foundation of ecopsychology and of ecotherapy, that our psyche, our emotions, our mental health is deeply embedded and connected to the health of the earth, that there is no separation, that if there is an unhealthy ecosystem, you will see unhealthy land, water, and people. Right? So this results in that separation, which is the trauma, right? And the trauma are the feelings of pain. They manifest as different illnesses in our body. And Dr. Joy DeGruy, who's a social worker and a scholar, coined the term in 2005, post-traumatic slave syndrome. And she says that this is a combination of conditions and experiences that have happened to a population of people of African descent who are descendants of those that were enslaved, that gets passed down from generation to generation, resulting in intergenerational trauma. But it's not just for Black people that are descendants of slaves. That's post-traumatic slave syndrome, but there's also post-traumatic colonial syndrome that many Latinx and Native American psychologists and API psychologists talk a lot as well, for communities of color where their homeland and their lands have been severely negatively impacted by colonialism. You see the same kind of intergenerational trauma within families, right? Mm-hmm. Pain, sadness, all of this, the trauma is passed down from generation to generation, and with white people as well. We know that with Jewish people, survivors of the Holocaust, there's a field of medicine called epigenetics that looked at the genes of survivors of Holocaust to see how trauma is passed down through DNA, through Jewish communities and Jewish families. So it's not just that only those of us who come from communities that were colonized, but also for white people who may come from settler communities where your people may have come to this land, and for Jewish people, all of this has resulted in trauma for all of us, right? And as we see now, as we live through multiple crises, the climate emergency, the pandemic, we're seeing collective trauma and grief. And I posit that you can trace all of this back to colonization and to the Great Separation, where we started to compartmentalize our lives more and we were less connected to the natural world. So remembering that nature is an essential part of our healing in the West, for some communities, there wasn't a need to remember. It's always been a close connection. But the mainstream community, medical communities, psychological communities are having more and more conversations, doing more and more research around the importance of how our mental, physical, spiritual health is directly connected to the health of the earth, as we see with climate change. There's a branch of psychology now called climate psychology. There's terms, I don't know if any of you have heard the term eco-anxiety.
No.
That is a term that some ecotherapists and psychologists are now using, that like I found myself experiencing some eco-anxiety the past few days because I was worried about my family in Texas, knowing that they're in the cold weather and they didn't have water and they didn't have power. And so more and more people are verbalizing how they are feeling fear and sadness around the state of the earth, wildfires, unprecedented winter storms. And so some psychologists and some ecotherapists are now using the term eco-anxiety, that we are actually experiencing anxiety as a result of what's happening with the climate emergency. So as I said, I work in public health. So a lot of the work, the way that I view this work is through a public health lens. And one of the things, this chart here is from the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, is that we're talking about a lot these days are social determinants of health. Maybe you've heard that or read that on that. When we talk about for example, we're talking about the pandemic now and how Latinx communities, Black communities are disproportionately dying from COVID. And why is that? And so they start pointing out things like lack of access, being an essential worker, working at the grocery store, farm workers, et cetera. So you're exposed more to COVID. Lack of access to healthcare, right? Other illnesses, maybe you live in an area like I do in East Oakland that has bad air and there's high rates of asthma. So all of these things are social determinants of health. There's nothing inherently wrong with Black people, with Latinx people, there's nothing inherently wrong with us. And I need to say that because I work in public health and I'm at these conferences and I look at data all the time. And if you look at it and read it all the time, you'll start believing that there's something wrong with us. Why do we always have higher rates of asthma? Why do we have higher rates of diabetes in some communities? And you can start, if you just focus on individual behavior, it will be easy to think that there's something wrong with you, something wrong with your culture. And that is not the case, right? As this chart shows, that genes and biology are only a small piece of health, determine what your health is. What is a bigger part is the total ecology. Even better, more than medical care, et cetera, is where do you live? Do you live in an area that has clean air, or do you live in an area where there's high rates of asthma? Do you live in an area where there are accessible, affordable food, right? Do you live in an area where you have easy access to transportation? Do you have health insurance? Because we know in the United States, health insurance is tied to having a job. And as students, right, it becomes tricky because if your parents have insurance, you can be on their insurance, but only for a certain amount of time. So one of the major things that impacts our health is our connection to the natural world. My doctor never asked me, Phoenix, how often are you going for walks out in nature? You know, they ask me, what's my BMI? Do I smoke? Those things are important, but that's only a small picture of health. And actually, as someone that has managed lots of clinics, health does not happen in the hospital. Health does not happen at the doctor's office. Health happens when you're with your family and your community. When you're sitting at your dining room table, what are y'all eating? That's health, right? Do you have strong relationships to people? Are you able to grow your own food? That's where health happens. But our health system and our mental health system, we focus on individual psychoses or psychologies, which is important. And we may look at family systems in a narrow way, but we're not looking at the whole ecosystem, right? And so this is where connecting to nature is a prevention, is a form of prevention for your health. The American Public Health Association, the largest public health association in the United States, put out a policy and put out a whole document talking about research demonstrates that contact with nature benefits people of all ages. Now, we know this intuitively, right? This is not new. This is rooted in indigenous wisdom. However, our systems have not been operating in that way. So to have a major public health association put out this statement was a really, really big deal to remind us that connecting with nature benefits all of us, and it's an important part of our health. Also, as a public health person, I like to say to people, this is evidence-based work. I am not just talking, I'm not making it up. Okay, I'm not repackaging something. Like, there are lots and lots of studies that have been conducted and are conducted that talk about how nature contact helps different aspects of our health. So one of the things, I don't know if you're this kind of a person, but I ruminate, meaning I think about things over and over again. And so my walks in nature help me kind of like let go of all of that can cause anxiety. And there's actually studies that saying experience connecting in nature can reduce that rumination in your brain that can lead to anxiety. We also know that safe, healthy exposure to nature can improve your creativity, can reduce symptoms of trauma. When you're in that fight or flight mode, if you find yourself really tense, you're not really breathing fully, we know how it feels. You go sit by a nice body of water, you're in the sun, you can breathe, your central nervous system begins to function at a more relaxed state of being. So there's also plenty of this, these are two small studies, but there's also plenty of evidence-based research that talks about connecting with nature is good for our health. But again, like I said, your doctor's not asking you about this. And your psychotherapist, if you have one, they're probably not asking you about this as well. I am saying that they should be asking. And if they don't ask, then you now have the information that you need so that you can have more control over your own health and your own well-being. There are different types of ecotherapy. So one form of ecotherapy is horticultural therapy, gardening, working with plants. And there's actually a compound in soil that studies have showed that can really act on the brain to relax us in a similar ways than antidepressant drugs are used. And this was interesting when I discovered this, because I remember my grandmother telling stories about how when my mother was pregnant, she would eat dirt. And that in certain communities in the South, in Black communities, it was a common thing. And in different countries in West Africa, that pregnant women would eat dirt, right, for the minerals in the soil. This was a cultural practice. And I'm sure if you do the research, you will find in many different cultures. So our ancestors knew what our modern interwebs brain can't get with these days, is that there is health in the soil, right? Also, another form of ecotherapy are animal assisted therapies. That's my little dog Wizard. And In many communities, especially for people that have been incarcerated, they have seen a lot of women and men that have been in prison. They train them to work with animals for animal-assisted therapies and healings. So also working with animals is a part of ecotherapy. So one of the things that I found in my practice of ecotherapy, so as I said, in 2011, I got a graduate certificate and I created my own practice. And one of the blind spots in the field of ecopsychology, ecotherapy, forest therapies, all of that, is that they lack an integration with social justice, right? There's unequal access to nature. Not everyone has access to be able to go to Mount Tam, right? I have a car. I don't even live in Marin. I drive. I have money for gas and a car. I have hiking boots. So not everyone has access to participate in what has been defined by the white mainstream environmental movement as environmental activities that you have to buy a lot of equipment. You got to buy a tent. You got to buy a fish, that is not accessible to many, many, many people. That's an issue of social justice, right? Lack of access or unequal access. There's also a lack of attention to disability justice. Not everybody can walk or, is here, can hear. And so in the outdoors field, environmental field, you rarely hear people talk about the issues of people with different disabilities being able to access these natural, if they want to go to a nice park, they don't always have, I rarely see wheelchair ramps at parks, right? So that's another social justice issue. We also know that Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color have high rates of respiratory illness because of where we live, right? So there's high rates of asthma, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another issue around social justice. We also know there's lack of access to clean water. All of these issues intersect with who can connect with nature, with how do you define nature? Is nature only going on Mount Tam? What if I sit on my porch with a plant? Is that connecting with nature? Right? So I want to encourage you to think more broadly of what nature is and how you can connect with nature. You don't need fancy equipment. You don't need to go to Mount Tam to experience the peace of nature, right? In many communities, especially communities of color, our relationship with food and through gardening and through tending the land, or even just having plants in the house, are just as valuable as doing a mountain trip to Mount Tam or somewhere else. So one of the things I also like to talk about is that, meet nature where you can meet nature where they are. It's a statement that we use in social work, meeting people where they are, right? So meet nature where it is. So look out your front door, right? And one of the things, we're very blessed in the Bay Area. We actually have access to some of the most beautiful places in nature in the world that other communities could never even imagine. So, but I encourage you to also know that and look at how do the issues of social justice intersect with who has access to nature, who feels safe in nature, and what does that mean for you? The world is changing. People talk about national parks, etc. We know by 2044, Black, Indigenous, and POC people will be the majority in the US. But the visitors that go to national parks, with the data and the way they track it, it's only like 5% of us that go to national parks. I didn't even know anything about national parks until I was an adult. And then to find out that my paternal grandfather helped build them, I was like, what? This is mine too. I'm part of this. I'm part of this story, right? But if you don't know about it, how, then you don't feel like you belong. And if you don't have access to the parks, then it seems like it's something out there beyond us, right? I also want to share, Yosemite is a beautiful park here that we go to, that people talk about in California. And to make Yosemite, Indigenous people were removed from the land, right?
Yeah.
So let's be clear, when John Muir, who is known as a well-known environmentalist, but who also was racist, John Muir, right? They went in their view of wilderness, their Eurocentric capitalistic view of wilderness meant that needed to get rid of the indigenous people, that would make it suitable for white people, right? So there's a long history of social justice that's interconnected into every system in our country, including our national park system, including who has access to these beautiful gems, including who has access to even feel safe to go walk in nature by yourself or with friends. These are also issues of social justice. We all don't have equal access, but we all should. Another thing that I found with my connection to nature and with working with other people is that it facilitates joy. I'm using the term Black joy, right? Because that's a term you're hearing a lot now in culture. Black culture is around the importance, like I said at the beginning of the talk, my ancestors, yes, there's pain and suffering, but there's also joy. And to know that, something that elders used to say in my community was that your story's not over yet. It may feel like it is because we're on because I'm not going to use the word lockdown because we're not locked down in prison because we're isolating at home. It may feel like, oh my God, my life, I'm young, I'm just getting started and I can't do anything. Your story isn't over yet. This will end, this will shift. And one of the places where I've been able to find peace, and actually one of the things that the CDC and doctors recommend during COVID that is a safer choice, is to be outside, is to be in nature, right? So you may not be able to connect with your friends and family close up inside, but being in nature is the safe place right now, and for some of us, right? So it also can facilitate feelings of joy, feelings of peace, where we can go and lay our burdens down and nature will absorb them. That's the beauty and the grace of the earth, right? And so during these times where we're all balancing so much, I highly encourage you to spend more time in nature, because that's where the joy is, that's where the peace is as well. Ecotherapy is for everyone, right? And these are some of the benefits, is that it can reduce isolation and loneliness. In the UK and in parts of Australia, ecotherapy is integrated in their public national health system. So for example, you go to your doctor, you have an issue, or you go to your therapist, you still go to your therapist, and they'll give you a referral to ecotherapy farm, where you would go there for extra support. So you may go there for support groups. So instead of sitting in a room talking about your issues, everybody's working with plants together, right? So this is something that is integrated in their regular health system in parts of the UK and Australia. Ecotherapy, we want to make sure that we're always supporting and honoring the rights of Indigenous people. There's been lots of conversation since we've had wildfires around how we need to listen to the Native people of California, because they are experts and they have long relationships with this place, that they know how to manage the landscape to reduce wildfires, right? So we want to make sure that we are honoring and respecting and listening to and supporting Indigenous people in our community. Ecotherapy can also empower us in our culture and our ancestral gifts, right? I always encourage people to find out your own ancestral earth story. One of the stories that I have from my ancestors is that one of my great aunts, she took care of the family garden, because in the 30s and 40s, there were no grocery stores where Black people could go to, that you couldn't go to a Safeway, and they were segregated. So most families had gardens. Almost every family had a little plot of something, a little plot growing your greens and your tomatoes. And I found that story about my great aunt. And once I found out that story, it just revealed more and more stories of my family and how they were deeply connected to nature. We never went camping. I never did anything like that, or were in Girl Scouts, but it was all tied to food and to growing plants and flowers and vegetables. So we all have stories of our ancestors, and a present day, you may have your own garden now that can connect us to our culture, right? Ecotherapy is not a substitute for psychotherapy, but it can be a support, and it's actually can be more accessible than psychotherapy and less expensive. So you don't need an ecotherapist to benefit from ecotherapy, but there are people like me and others that integrate ecotherapy into their practices as social workers, as psychotherapists, that part of the session could take place outdoors in nature, and or you bring nature into the session, right? So this is not something, it's an emerging field in that it's less fringe than it used to be in the 90s. And now as we're experiencing the climate emergency and we're seeing all the intersecting crises that are happening, more and more well-respected mental health, medical doctors and others are talking about the benefits of connecting with nature for our health. Not just the benefits, but the necessity, especially in times like we have today where we are so socially isolated from each other. These are a few books that I want to recommend. The Healing Wisdom of Africa, Malidoma Some. I put his quote up earlier. It's a really wonderful, wonderful book from his culture, Burkina Faso in West Africa. And he talks a lot about how we are all going through certain kinds of rites of passage. And he looks at nature and the natural world through his cultural lens. And then the book in the middle, Ecotherapy, Healing with Nature in Mind. One of my mentors, Dr. Craig Chalkwis, is the editor of this. And this book is old now, but it's just it's a form of essays from different people that practice ecotherapy. And then Ghetto Plainsman, which is the book that one of my friends, Jared Manos, wrote, which is his autobiography around how he found healing by deeply connecting with nature. He was on a path headed towards jail. He was dealing drugs and in that life. And it was through him deeply connecting to the plains, actually in Texas, where he was able to find healing. And I was telling Patricia earlier, they're going to be making a movie about his life story. So look out for that. But these are 3 really good books that I recommend if you want to learn more about ecotherapy. And then I want to just encourage everyone to have your own little ecotherapy plan. It sounds really simple, I know, and you're like, this is real, and it is. In many ways, it is very simple. However, I'd like to invite you to observe yourself, right? Like as you go through your day, how easy is it for you to connect with nature? Meaning getting off the computer, getting off your phone, sitting outside or going for a walk, however, working with plants. What I found is that now that we're working at home, I have more time, but I'm still, even with me teaching and talking about this work all the time, I have to fight. I have to fight for my connection to nature. I have to force myself to get out of that mindset that I need to be sitting at this computer all day, get out of the house, right? Put my phone in my pocket. Don't spend my whole time looking at my phone while I'm outside, right? So I invite you to really look at your daily routines. One of the things I had to add since we've been working at home, I've been working at home since last March. I miss the commute, the commute you had in some ways. Like I would walk to the bus stop or to the bar. So I have now reinstituted a morning commute, and it's my morning nature walk. So where I used to get up and go walk to go get to the train or to the bar or whatever, I now get up and go walk, and that's my morning commute before I turn on any electronic devices. I had to do that. Another thing, like I've said before, it's so important to support Indigenous rights. And we are living in a time where Native American activism and culture is booming and blossoming in this country and in other countries. And we're very, very blessed and fortunate to live in the Bay Area where we can have direct connection with the living culture here. So I really encourage you. I don't know how you guys have integrated Miwok community and Native community culture in your wilderness classes, but it's really, really important that you connect with the Indigenous people in your community and listen and learn. Another thing is looking at your ancestors. So what does ancestors have to do with healing trauma in the earth? As I said earlier, remember, there's post-traumatic slave syndrome, there's post-colonial syndrome, that we are very much connected to the stories and to the experiences of trauma that our ancestors experienced. And many of those traumas originated with some kind of abrupt or violent disconnection from earth, from place, either through genocide, taking land away, through forced immigration, having to leave your land, through enslavement, through colonization as a settler, where your ancestors may have come and taken land from other people, right? So looking at your ancestors from the view of what is their earth story and how does it connect to where you are today and how you feel about your connection to place. And then just an easy thing, plants and healing, plants. So, you know, even if you may feel like you don't really have a strong connection to plants, I encourage you to just explore, even looking from your ancestors as well. Like, are there certain plants or fruits or vegetables from your ancestors that you can build a relationship with? You don't need fancy materials or books to learn this. Like, it's really a spiritual and intuitive experience. So I grew up in San Antonio. In our backyard, we always had pecan trees. So there would always be huge bags of pecans at any of my relatives' house. Like, you go, there's pecans. So the pecan is a very important nut and seed to me and my family. There's very deep connections. We always have pecan trees, all of those things. So that's a way that I have really deepened my connection with nature as well. Because sometimes it's not as easy. You may not have the stories that you may think you need to have a certain kind of story, but that's not the case, right? Our story isn't over yet, and our ancestors have left us so many gifts from how, you know, they have connected with nature, and how the elders in our family may connect to nature now. So I highly encourage you to look at plants in your family and plants in your life, and nurture those relationships, right? So one way that my work has shifted is in March, we're launching an organization. We're not a full nonprofit, we're a project called the Alliance for Ecotherapy and Social Justice, and we have a fiscal sponsor. And this idea came from, since 2011, me just figuring things out one bit at a time, you know, using my public health skills. So, you know, I would just go around and I would literally just talk to people like this all the time. You want to hear about nature and health? And I put together a little training. You know, I just use the skills I have, and people were like, this is interesting. And I know a lot of this because of my public health background. People were able to hear me in a different way, maybe if I didn't have that. But that is how I brought together all my different experiences and skills to do ecotherapy. And then the Alliance, we are working on building this project out where we will do several things. One, I believe research is important. And I think, and there are different types of research. There's Indigenous research, and then there's Western scientific, using a scientific method research. And so because it's an emerging field, we have our intern now who's actually a graduate student, a social work graduate student, who's doing a literature review in the field of nature and health and ecotherapy to look at what does the research say around where social justice and connecting with nature and health are intersecting. So we're doing that. And we're also supporting people in doing community-based research projects around their own ecotherapy projects. And then we will also be launching later this year a certificate program that I'm calling Liberation Ecotherapy, where we will provide knowledge and skills and the theories around ecotherapy for people who already have ideas around some ecotherapy project, and we'll be able to support them with that as well. And so this is what we're launching next month, and we're doing this in the middle of while we're also doing all of our other work, but we're very, very, very excited about it. And we're getting a lot of positive feedback because, like, as I said, the fields of ecotherapy, nature and health, horticulture, all of that, they are lacking a social justice lens to look at the work. Because as I said, remember, not everyone has equal access or equitable access to nature connection. So that's another project that I'm working on there. And then I just want to give thanks. I want to also show that, I've been able to get funding for this work. So this past fall, we did a series of seminars called Ecotherapy for Everyone, Healing for Peace and Justice. I got a grant from the city of Oakland that received money from SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, working with communities around resiliency. And they were excited about my work, and they gave us a small grant that allowed us to do a 2-week free series over Zoom where we had different leaders in the field of ecotherapy talk about different aspects of the field. So the work is fundable, and people want to support it. And also I want to just encourage you as students, as you're looking at your career and you're looking at, well, what am I going to do? Like, ecotherapy, ecopsychology, forest therapy are viable fields that you can consider, that aren't expensive to get into, that can complement other work that you're doing, but that we need more and more people to be able to create programming and interventions that can help with healing around the intersection of nature and health, right? So I'm, it's an emerging and growing field. So that means there's opportunities for creativity and opportunities for expanding the field in a variety of ways. So I encourage you to think about that also. It's like, as you're moving forward in your college career, is this something that I'm interested in? What might this look like for me if I want to do this, contribute to this and do this work as well? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and just open it up.
There's a few questions in the chat, and I want to just thank you for encouraging our students to get involved in this work. What I find very encouraging and inspiring by my students is that they're very open to talking about mental health and into wellness and taking care of themselves. They're really motivated to move in a more positive direction. And so thank you for offering that to our students and giving this background for them, especially for our students of color who are struggling or who are looking for a new path. So I really appreciate that. There is a few questions in the chat. There's one question here, how do we get ready for our mind to spend time in nature, which I think is perfect. How do we get ready for that? How do we, whatever choice we make?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would say it's different for everyone. I would say find out what is it that you like to do. So for me, walking is something that's just really important for me, and that helps me to calm my mind. And it takes me minimum 20-30 minutes of walking before I can feel that inner peace. So it's different for everyone. It could be walking, it could be sitting at water, it could be bringing a journal, writing while you're in nature, listening to music while you're in nature. I encourage you to just find out what works best for you. How would I define Black joy? I'm just going to jump into the questions as I see.
That's great.
That's a good question. I define Black joy. Black joy for me is when I went backpacking for the first time by myself as an old person. I'm older. Like I went by myself and my backpack was like way too heavy. I made all those kinds of mistakes, but I experienced joy because, one, I was able to do it. I figured it out. I was able to do it. But I was also able to just feel a sense of openness and freedom that is hard for me to feel when I'm sort of in my regular day, right? Black joy for me is swimming in a river. Black joy for me is going to, remember when we can go to more barbecues or family reunions outside in nature with my family. So, I think it's very specific to the person, but I think it's important to nurture it. even if when you don't feel it, because some days I don't feel it, right? But especially during these times where we are bombarded by just the constant trauma of what's happening in the world and the stories of all the bad things, is unplug from your phone, unplug from the computer, and just, get a download from nature, to just make sure that you protect your space and protect your peace in doing that. That's how I would define Black joy.
Love it.
What other questions?
How do we connect with Indigenous people? That's the next one.
Well, Marin Community College is on Miwok land. So do y'all have Native American Studies at Marin Community College? Is there a Native American Studies department, or?
I think
It's within ethnic studies. There's a course on it.
Yeah, so I actually went to a webinar by a Native American scholar at Humboldt. I'm sorry, I can't remember her name right now. Feminist, Native American woman feminist. And one of the things that she said was that she said, you want to know how to connect more in with Indigenous people? There are so many low cost and free classes on Native American culture and history in California. I learned a lot from her presentation. For example, California likes to talk a lot about how California wasn't involved in slavery, right? Which is not true, right? Native American people were enslaved. And specifically, it was women and girls. It was sex slaves.
Yep.
So when she shared that information, just learning about the history of this place, right? You learn, you go deeper down the well, and the fact that here in Oakland, there's a project, Segurate Land Trust Project. I'm very fortunate to be close to here in Oakland, where Native women have created a project, a nonprofit, where they encourage people, if you live on a lonely land, whether you rent or you own a house, that you pay a tax to them. And this is a tax of gratitude for living on their land. So we are very fortunate in that there are many, many different ways here in the Bay Area that you can connect with Indigenous communities and Native communities here. Let me see.
Yeah, there's one question about recommend any BIPOC focused ecotherapy certification training, because some of the training is very whitewashed. It's one of the questions.
Right, and that's one of the challenges, is that there aren't any. We're working on one, so we're working on one, but there aren't any other. The field is very Eurocentric. Holos Institute, yep, that is. I know people that have gone there and done work there, but many of the programs are very white. They're very Eurocentric and very narrowly focused. So we're creating our certificate program that we're hoping should be ready in the fall of this year. And another thing is, you don't need a certificate to practice ecotherapy. It can help if you want to get a background of the field, etc. But I will make sure I send to Patricia a list of books and resources. So there are books, there are websites, there are people you can follow on Instagram that you should follow. I am in about 5 different Black women plant groups on Facebook, and they are the best thing in the world. First of all, I learned so much. And they're hilarious. The Black women are just hilarious. But there are a lot of Instagram groups and pages of people that are talking about this work. So I highly encourage, I'll give her a list, and we'll have a list of resources so that you'll know the websites and all the books, etc. There's a free event this weekend with members of the Coast. This is great. Colleen just posted that.
Awesome. Thank you, Colleen.
Yeah. Most definitely. Yes, Dr. Baldy, Kucha Risling Baldy. Yes, that is the person. Thank you for whomever put that. I went to her webinar where she was sharing just a lot of gems. And also, I don't know if you've noticed, but now with people are doing land acknowledgments. Have y'all heard of that? Land acknowledgments. So before events, they're acknowledging that this is the land in the Indigenous community. But Dr. Baldy says that that's not enough. We don't just want to be performative and say, oh, this is the land. That's why I put that link to the fundraiser for the Miwok people, right? We don't just want to say, oh, well, I know the right words to say, and it's just a performance. But we want to be connected to the communities that are here now and support them. Native American communities have the worst COVID death rates and sick rates than any community in the United States. So you want to support Indigenous communities? You can find many Native American communities all over the country that are doing fundraisers to support with the communities there that are suffering from COVID, right? So it's important that we're not just being performative and acknowledging the land, but that we are actively working to build relationships, right? With the people here on this land. Let me see. Can you please tell me how ecotherapy will help me in the future? I'm interested in doing my master's in behavior science. Can you explain a little the advantage of knowing ecotherapy in that field? That's a good question. So I think one of the things when we look at behavior science, one of the things that we look at is why do people do what they do, right? And so there is a branch of psychology where people are looking at why do people make decisions around their connection to nature? Why do they make kind of decisions on what kind of things that they will purchase and buy? But there's also looking at how can we move towards a more ecocentric society? So I think in behavioral science, there's definitely a need for more data and more research and more support as people want to move towards connecting more with nature in ways that you can share information with them in a similar way that I'm doing that now. But when you're a behavior scientist, people listen to you in a completely different way. So there's definitely a need for ecotherapy in that field as well. Let me see here. Yes, someone mentioned here Shinryu Yoku, which is the forest bathing. Thank you for that. So much research that comes out of Japan, right? Where they found in Japan that spending certain amounts of time doing certain activities in the forest definitely impacts your health in a positive way. So again, this is not fairy tale hippie stuff that's just being made up, right? This is tied to cultures and communities that have actually been doing their own research around the benefits. And the thing about this for me too, ecotherapy is not just about me and my relationship with nature. And so this is where social justice comes in. If we are not becoming more compassionate with ourselves, with each other, and in our connection to the natural world, then what's the point of ecotherapy? How is it really helping? Because the earth is suffering right now. We want more people to be activists on behalf of the earth and behalf of the water and behalf of the plants. And so my hope in this work and the way that I do it is that by waking up to our own suffering and our own pain and seeing that mirrored in the natural world, that we can love the natural world as much as we love ourselves. And if we don't love ourselves more, the natural world will help us love ourselves more. I have found that to be the case. So we really want people to move beyond just a traditional psychotherapeutic model, right? Where it's just about me and myself, but looking at a community model where when I feel better and I'm more active in my community and nature, then I can be more of an advocate for saving these beautiful places and the people that live there as well.
Phoenix, I really appreciate all that you're presenting. And one of the things that I was thinking about, and I think you touched upon it in your presentation, and what I really want to encourage students, especially students of color, is like, how do you talk more about tradition and connecting to your ancestors? Because there has been kind of a disassociation. So how do we get students to really think about that and honor that and have that part of the healing? Can you talk more about that, tradition and ancestors?
Yeah, I think that, if I was doing a wilderness course, right? So you have the whole wilderness course, right?
Right.
Part of the wilderness course would be around ancestral earth stories. Is that the stories lived in our elders and with our ancestors, is that many of us don't have the stories. Like I shared, I didn't know that my paternal grandfather worked and helped building national parks. Why didn't someone tell me that when I was younger, right? That little bit of information totally changed my perspective and my relationship with national parks. I can say, yeah, my family helped build those too. So I would always include, and that's one of the things we include in our certification program, is how do we want to be a good ancestor, right? Because for young people, they're looking at us and they're like, y'all have messed it up for us in every area.
Yes.
Like y'all are leaving us with a mess. And so we do owe them. If we just think about, the traditional Native philosophy around what we do now connects us to 7 generations. So that means every act that I'm taking now, before I take it, I need to think about 7 generations from me. And we owe that to young people. Like, one, how to be a good ancestor. What is the legacy I want to leave, right? My work in ecotherapy is my way of putting beauty in the world, and is the legacy I want to leave to my family and the young people in my family, right? So how do we want to be a good ancestor? Then what are the stories, our earth stories from our ancestors? And sometimes our stories are so painful that our people don't want to talk about them, right? Why you want to bring that stuff up? So I don't want to talk about when we were sharecroppers or farm workers, or nobody wants to talk about that. And that's understandable, right? So what I have found 100% of the time, my data that I've collected, right? My experience, 100% of the time when I ever do ecotherapy trainings and I have people of color, every person of color, no matter what their race or ethnicity, they start talking about food.
Yes.
They start talking about something that their grandma, their abuelita, their grandparents, they use this fruit. My grandmother liked this fruit a lot. Or she used to make this dish that had these different peppers or these different greens. That has been the entryway to them talking about ancestors. That has been my experience 100% of the time. And it's always with the people of color. They don't start talking about, we used to go camping or fishing. Maybe occasionally. It's about food. And for many of us, that is the deep, deep connection to the positive stories of our ancestors, is through food, growing food, making different food, learning about different vegetables. So that's what I would suggest. And that's what I have seen. And when it's difficult for us to talk about our ancestral history because of the pain, is that when we start talking about food and meals, that's when people really become alive with their ancestral stories.
Yeah, and that shows a lot of resilience, right? A lot of resilience from, the difficulties of colonization and slavery, but you created this whole additional culture, a whole different cuisine and food, and using from what you had and make nutritious food to survive. I think that just highlights just the resilience of people of color and Black people in this country. And also thinking about, as we close out, I want to think about or hear your thoughts on, where do you see your work in this? Where do you see your continued work in ecotherapy? Because I think it's really important. What do you see that, and how you see that with people of color in the future?
Well, I like to teach. So I see the work through the alliances that doing a lot of things like this. And we're putting together a series of summits for the spring, the summer, and fall. We're going to have different people talk about different aspects of ecotherapy. But I also see I like research, in that as a public health person, I can see ecotherapy clinics in every clinic in the country. Right? So many people don't have insurance and they go to community health centers, right? I can see where when you go to community health center, there's an ecotherapy program there. Maybe it's that they have a garden there. And so you're getting your blood pressure checked in the garden, right?
Ooh.
Wouldn't you want to go to the doctor more if you knew,
Yes.
like, oh, actually, I'm gonna go get my blood pressure checked in the garden, right? So I really want to be part of a movement to integrate ecotherapy into our public health system. Like I said, is already being done in the UK. And so it's not that it's anything new. And so that's why a major part of the Alliance is we are having a research component where we're going to be tracking the research, but also in the certification program, we're going to be encouraging people to create their own community-based research project. So if they have an ecotherapy project where they're working with young people and taking them on nature walks, they're evaluating the impact of those walks are having on them, right? I think that's very useful. Also to listen to Native elders and Indigenous research as well. So that's one of the things that I see in my work growing in that way, and just being able to support more Black and POC people to become ecotherapists or to do ecotherapy work. That's definitely needed.
I love all of that. I love all of it. Thank you so much, Phoenix, for educating us. And I see that we have so much alliance with what we're doing here at College of Marin, and especially for our students, and just seeing the response for this event. We're gonna have you back. So I'm so grateful and thankful for you. And yeah, send me any resources that I can share with the College of Marin community and for our staff and students, especially for our students, because this is what we do. This is what we are focusing on, and want to provide healing and encouragement for our students so that they know to keep moving forward with the support of us as well as their ancestors.
Yes, most definitely.
Representing.
And you're very fortunate, Marin Community College, like that mountain, Mount Tam, I'm telling you, it's a powerful place. It's a powerful place. And Marin sits in a powerful place. And so really connecting in with the Miwok people there in the community there will only benefit the program and only benefit you as individuals. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to listen. And I will send a list of resources, and any student, Patricia, give them my email address.
Yes.
And EcoSoul Wisdom. Any students, if you ever have any questions, you want to ask me questions, I love getting questions from students, and I'm available. Please do not hesitate to reach out. Make sure you say, hey, I was at Marin Community College, so I'll know who you are, so you can go to the top of my email list. But if any of the students want to contact me, please reach out.
Thank you. So I want to say thank you again, Phoenix, for all that you presented. I also want to remind the students that there are so many different mental health equity and mental health events that are going on. Colleen just put in a link to our poetry and mental health. So please think about joining that. Again, all of these things are for you students to support yourself. So make sure you check out the psychological services who have actually supported this event as well in terms of equity and mental health. So make sure you check out some of the events. I know in my class, I've been emailing everybody saying that these things are here for you. So make sure you check that out. I want to say thank you to the Umoja Equity Institute who helped me with all of this, and again, helping the psychological services to put some of these events on. So I really want to say thank you to that. And I want to say thank you to Colleen, Dr. Colleen Myhall, Dr. Yashika Crawford, who have helped in organizing all of this and doing the technical backup. And I want to say thank you to Walter Turner, who is on this as well. Walter Turner, Professor Turner is an instructor here at College of Marin who is in the Ethnic Studies and History department. And lastly, Tanya Hirsch, who is the Dean of Educational Success, who also is part of the Umoja Equity Institute. So I just want to give a shout out to everybody who has been part of this. And this is going to be a continuous thing, and we will keep in touch, Phoenix. And yes, send me info.
I will. It's nice meeting everyone. Thank you so much.
All right, take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye, everyone. Have a great